Over the years, indigenous peoples in the whole world live harmoniously with nature. Even through simple living, they thrive within the riches of the environment, taking care not to disrupt the balanced order of nature. Their culture and traditional knowledge, honed by centuries of experience and practice, have always been their pillars of guidance for the utilization of the natural resources around them. Nature has been inseparable to their way of life and was always vital for their survival. When industrialization transpired, many of the indigenous people's lands have been transformed into sites for large-scale mining and massive logging. Many of the rivers became locations for dams. For most of the indigenous peoples, these projects led to more harmful effects.
No dinadaal mo, iti sigod anormal, iti balansya, iti aglawlaw, wenno iti makunkuna nga forma, iti sigod nga adadagitan, di adati epekto na.
Mining operations led to the siltation of rivers and other waste source of communities, which aggravated forest degradation caused by massive logging. Concurrently, machineries and equipment brought about high carbon emissions and other biochemical hazards that pollute the atmosphere. The ill effects of these so-called development projects were further felt when the climate drastically changed around the world. During the 13th Conference of the Parties in 2007, REDD, or Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, was first introduced as a mitigation mechanism to the climate crisis. This mechanism recognized the contribution of deforestation and forest degradation to the drastic change of climate. The core principle and provision giving financial incentives to developing countries to preserve its forests to reduce carbon emissions.
REDD is a new terminology for one of a way to combat the effect of climate change.
They're talking about payment for environmental services, which is a concept that has been introduced for a longer time.
India is preparing to implement the REDD program, but more of a kind of preparing for the readiness program.
Vietnam is now a we call REDD country, and this is started with the UN REDD project since September 2009.
So that the implementation of the REDD is not yet operationalized in this country, but they are in the national level office. They are still conceptualizing how this REDD would be implemented in the Philippines.
I know that the President of Indonesia has signed MOU with Swedish government in Oslo to get some that Indonesia will contribute 25% in his budget for climate change.
This project has mainly focused on strengthening capacity for all Vietnamese government at all levels on readiness to REDD, and this will include also land use right of ethnic minorities. At the beginning, they are very, very happy with the idea of UN-REDD. They understand that UN-REDD will help them to conserve the forest. If they involve in REDD process, they cannot use the forest as they used in the past, and they cannot practice the traditional custom. For example, in the forest, they cannot make fire when they get they collect honey, for example, and all these things will affect to their life. Shifting cultivation is also impossible because they cannot cut forest, they cannot burn forest as a procedure in shifting cultivation.
Of late, India has come up with a national climate change action program. There are several missions, and one of the mission is called the Green India Mission. Another mission is called the Water Mission. How do you define what is degraded land? Because under this mission, the Green India Mission insisted on planting plantations like biofuels and others in degraded areas. For indigenous people, we don't have a place called degraded areas. Every place, every part of our land has its value, its own area uses. Not just for our people, but also for our animal, for our livestock, for cultivation, and also for many purposes. So for us, there is no such thing as degraded areas.
For us, Papuan indigenous peoples, it is something really mysterious that, and it means that it will be only the project of the government officials, and it cannot become. The Papuan indigenous people will not get any benefit from this project.
If it gets to the Philippines, does it end up benefiting the people, the country, or just the few? I think it will be mostly government and government agencies that will benefit from that because of the funding. Given the status in the Philippines and the record so far where the few control Philippine society, Philippine economy, that is what will happen.
We have heard that in Mindanao, a lot there have been carbon cowboys getting into the communities. These are like private entities, middlemen. If you have in the market, we have these middlemen. No? So these are like private entities who come and offer, to buy the credits, the carbon offsets that you make from your forests, and they can sell it to anybody. There's also been reports that early this year, one of these carbon cowboys have entered the Cordillera, and I think they went to Kabayan or Kapangan. So still, these are initial reports, and these have to be validated.
There are potential areas in the Cordilleras for the fact that Cordillera is considered as a watershed cradle of northern Philippines. It has an area of 1.8 million hectares. 85% is considered forest. Apayao province is one of the provinces in CAR that has the widest area of forest. In Ifugao, there are dipterocarp forest and a little area of Benguet pine. So with the province of Kalinga. Benguet, it's composed of Benguet pine, also in Mountain Province. There are also potentials for this REDD. The policy on REDD is still at the top level, so we are just being furnished of what are being conducted there, but at the local level, we still have no consultation yet.
REDD Yes, REDD, which has been offered as a solution to climate change crisis, the present-day climate change crisis, is a very flawed process.
REDD is only a mechanism through which industrialist countries or capitalist country actually can make more profit.
It's basically capitalist countries and corporations cashing in on the issue of climate change, cashing in on the issue of environmental protection and preservation. But however, these supposedly alternatives to the present climate crisis does not address the cause. What causes climate change? What causes the sudden change in temperatures, or what causes all of these so-called natural disasters?
The government has been introducing plantation crops for a long time, and there are so many policies that favors plantations and monocropping instead of vis-a-vis as compared to the diversified kind of plant cultivation which indigenous people have been adopting. When you insist on mono cultivation of crops, it will only allow a process where companies will come and benefit from that process. So it will lead to further loss of life for indigenous people. It will lead to further displacement of indigenous people. It will lead to more land alienation, and it will undermine the food sovereignty of indigenous people, and it will again push them into that periphery where they have to struggle for survival.
In the carbon-based mechanism, there is also condition of calculating carbon. Still, there is no any kind of negotiation of carbon parameters and calculating. That's why it is being very difficult.
If our government access funds for REDD, I know that it will be corrupted. It will not be accessed by the people themselves.
From our recent discussions and exchanges with our members from the Asian region, there is basically very little information on REDD.
I was invited to attend the national planning for REDD. And this REDD, we also discussed a little bit about the involvement of indigenous peoples in the process of REDD. I found out that it is not an opportunity for the people who are the stewardship of the forest.
Indigenous peoples who are going to be affected by the REDD implementation of the REDD project are not been part of the in the decision making process right from the very beginning. And because indigenous peoples are not informed, are not involved in the decision making process, so there is a serious issue with the denial of the indigenous people's right to free, prior, and informed consent. And because of that, when they push through, it has led to a division among the indigenous peoples over how should we address our issues of climate change. When you promote REDD as a modality to solve climate crisis, it doesn't take into account of certain realities which are detrimental to indigenous people's rights. It only legitimizes or consolidates the right to pollute, because REDD is a mechanism which will still allow the industrialized countries to pollute, to continue to pollute, to continue to emit the greenhouse gases which contribute into the climate crisis.
For indigenous peoples, when we speak of climate crisis, I think the best alternative or the best solution that we can provide is to look into activities, corporate activities that lead to the climate crisis. One, on this so-called expansion of extractive and large-scale mining operations, the construction of energy plants like dams, hydro dams, the expansion of monocrop commercial plantations. All of these, of course, plus logging, all of these have led to not only deforestation but the destruction of the entire environment.
First of all, there's this problem of information that has to be addressed. So we're talking here of information that is relevant and information that they can understand and chew.
I think in our solidarity, our partnership, and our engagement, we remind each other, inform each other about REDD, and make us realize of the impact of REDD to the people.
And people must collectively also be aware, must be aware of what's happening with the way how people are taking decisions to combat climate crisis. And then indigenous people should be prepared and should build all capacity, all necessary capacity to ensure that we reclaim our space, we reclaim that space to ensure that our voices are heard.
It's really very important for not only among indigenous peoples to unite on how to view REDD and other alternatives, so-called alternatives, being pushed by corporations that essentially is actually also another profit-making scheme for indigenous peoples, for them to look into all of these solutions and to unite and push for more sustainable and viable alternatives. So that would include probably lobbying governments to come out with very clear policies that would control, or at the very least call for a moratorium on large-scale destructive mining operations.
Millions of the indigenous peoples, including me, still depending on the forest. As indigenous peoples, we know how to treat our forest, our land, our territories, even our resources.
Indigenous peoples with the least contributor to the climate change crisis, and also as a people who have exclusive right over our domain, over our ancestral domain, over our land and forests and our resources. And indigenous peoples have the utmost responsibility to ensure that our rights over our land, our territories and our resources are fully respected in any form of development policies and projects which are planned or which are proposed to be introduced in our part.
In our place, we have to maintain our muyung and our communal forest in order that the land or the area will not get so much dried, in order that the water will be maintained. And it's there where we could get our supply of water for the rice fields. And in another way, it's there also where we could get our drinking water. That's why we have free drinking water. We do not pay. And it's a common practice in our place that we have to maintain our muyung system and the communal forest, because people from other places could just come and benefit from our forest.
เพราะฉะนั้นหลายๆที่แล้วที่รัฐบาลไม่สามารถดูแลได้เพราะว่ากลุ่มพี่น้องเนี่ยเราอยู่กับป่าเราช่วยกันดูแลป่ามาตลอดปัจจุบันพอเอาเข้าไปอยู่รัฐบาลจ้างคนมาดูแลเนี่ยเขาไม่มีจิตใจที่จะดูแลป่าอย่างจริงจังเหมือนพวกเรา
When we speak of environment, as far as indigenous peoples are concerned, this would include peoples. And unfortunately, to this day, because of indigenous peoples' very close relations with the land, most of the remaining natural resources are found in indigenous peoples' territories. So before we speak of REDD, I think we should really address the causes of the climate crisis. And the way really to respond to the climate crisis is to put a stop into these destructive practices and look for more viable and sustainable alternatives.